Well, welcome to the Designing for the Future panel. I'm Jamie Jones. I'm a faculty member here at the Fuqua School of Business. I'm a professor of the practice of management and organizations, and I'm also the executive director of our Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And I'm absolutely honored and thrilled to be joined by an amazing panel of distinguished guests today who are going to share their thoughts on the role that design thinking can play in meeting the future needs of consumers. So not today's needs, the future needs of the consumer. And there's a lot that we can say about this past year. It's been a wild year, that's for sure. And we're operating in just an absolute sea of ambiguity. But I think one thing we can all agree on is that we've seen an acceleration of change due to this confluence of crises that we have faced as a country and as a community. And so through this panel discussion, what I'm hoping we can do is really start to explore how we can utilize the design thinking approach to innovate, and how we can use that to help us identify and understand future customer preferences, which will be driven by access to new technologies, shifting social and political factors, and perhaps even the uncertain economic conditions that we're facing as a nation. And so rather than me botch a bunch of introductions, I want the panelists to really take some time and introduce themselves, share with us and share with you who they are, what they do, and how they apply design thinking in their organization. So helping us put into context the comments that they're going to make along the way. And so I'm going to call on each of you to go through a series of introductions. Ricky, and we're going to start with you.
Sure. First of all, thank you very much, and pleasure being here. Super excited to learn a thing or two today as well. So I'm Ricky Tan. I work for Dell, and I'm basically a product innovation strategist. And I'm actually located in our Amsterdam studio. And I think it's interesting that this panel is about designing for the future. Actually, at Dell, we are inherently always being forced to design for the future because it just takes a while to manufacture really our new products. So we do need to be very focused on the future. But I guess in that context, I'm even further in the future in the scope of Dell. So yeah, I mentioned that I do product innovation strategy, and initially my charter was to figure out, what products should Dell be doing. And what I quickly learned, basically with the help of a super valuable mentor, is the most important thing was actually thinking about how we do innovation. And that's really a heavy focus on human-centered design or design thinking. And so I've become a bit of a change agent for that in the company. And so I guess day in, day out, I'm asking, dumb questions like, who is this for? I'm also leading user research because that's a very new capability for the organization. So I either lead it, I think this year I did maybe 40 user interviews, or I teach it because, again, we're trying to build that muscle in the organization. And then aside from that, sometimes I'm a product manager, product owner, depending on how you call it, for incubation projects.
Terrific. Well, really looking forward to digging into that experience, Ricky. Tara.
Thanks, Jamie, for having us. And Ricky, it's so good to hear that you're bringing human-centered design into your practice. I'm Tara. I'm with IDEO. IDEO is a 40-year-old design consultancy, and they really are the pioneers of human-centered design, which is the practice of bringing the user and putting that into the center of products, experiences, strategies that you design. And we can go into that a little bit later. My role is super interesting at IDEO. I'm actually an investor on their early stage fund. This is pretty new. This is a new thing that IDEO is doing, but it's been an interesting couple of years as we sort of navigate into the space. I'm based in San Francisco. My background is that I have led design for a bunch of startups in emerging tech. The last startup I was at was a 3D printing startup where we made sort of personal 3D printers, and it was really fun. That was really in the future. Everyone was sort of looking at, mass production of custom digital manufacturing. So that was really cool. So fast forward, I joined IDEO about 5 years ago to join an R&D lab or venture studio where they were spinning out sort of new products and new ventures based on emerging tech. And fast forward, I think, what emerged out of that work was a realization that we were a really great support network and sort of a creative partner in crime for these incredible startup founders that we're now working with. So super excited to be here and excited to share more. One last thought I would sort of end with, Jamie, as you sort of mentioned this pandemic that we're living in. Someone mentioned this a couple of days earlier and it totally blew my mind. They said, this is the first time that the entire world is experiencing the world through the internet, right? It's kind of a once in a generation or once in a lifetime sort of experience where there's this massive social experiment that everyone is living through. So I would probably just, sort of use that as a prompt to see how might we redesign the future through this lens.
Wonderful. I love the framing. Thank you for sharing that, Tara. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. I'm a product manager here at IBM in Durham, North Carolina. And specifically, my responsibility is overseeing the user experience across our various software products in a platform context. So I spend a lot of my time talking to users, working with the design team, and basically figuring out how do you take these different software products, make them work well together, and provide an experience to the end user that's going to be cohesive, that's going to allow for collaboration across different roles. So a lot of kind of business transformation and integration and design innovation work. And then in addition to that, as I guess a side hustle of sorts, I do a lot of writing and speaking and consulting for tech ethics issues. So thinking about some of the ethical challenges with technology and design. A lot of that is very future-oriented work. And trying to bring some of that into my work at IBM as well, which is a really good community for that kind of thought. So that's mostly what I do.
Thanks, Andrew. I can't wait to dig in a little bit more on the ethics side of that as well a little bit later on in our discussion. Bobby.
Thanks, Jamie. And I appreciate your strategic decision not to call anybody out by the last name, as I know that my last name tends to not be the easiest to pronounce. And folks, the panelists, really excited to hear from you guys. It's you have incredible roles. So I'm really glad to be on a panel with you. My name is Bobby Shkolnikov, and I work at SAS Institute. I'm helping drive the IoT commercialization strategy and building an ecosystem of partners with whom we can co-create and co-sell offerings with. So since joining SAS about a year ago, my focus has been on how can we help with SaaS's evolution from being what traditionally was a products company towards becoming a solutions as a services organization. And I spent the bulk of my career as a management consultant prior to joining SAS, with a short stint within Google's analytics and forecasting group. And I graduated from Fuqua in 2016. And my plan was to go back to the DC area after I graduated, but both my wife and I, we absolutely fell in love with the area and decided to become townies. And now we live just a couple blocks away from Monuts. And I guess just one message to the first year students is that I'm super excited for y'all to experience Durham once things start stabilizing and coming back to normal a little more.
That's awesome. And if this whole daytime job doesn't work out, maybe the Durham Chamber of Commerce will invite you to come join them too, because I think you're definitely the biggest proponent. Love that. Thank you so much. It's been, again, I hope all of you can tell what a diverse panel we have, and also perspectives, and then also how interesting our panelists are in terms of how they're approaching and leveraging their specific design skill set in their current roles. And so I want to start to dig into the topic that we're focused on today around the future. And I want to ask the panelists, what are the emerging trends in technology, in consumer behaviors, in the socio-political context that you're most excited about, that you think are going to drive big change, and then complement that with sharing how you think these changes are going to actually drive the change in products and services that consumers are looking for. And so I'm going to start actually where we just ended with Bobby, and then turn the floor over to Tara after that.
Absolutely. So that's an awesome question. The two use cases that I kind of wanted to focus on from an Internet of Things lens to address this. One is the cold chain for vaccine distribution and other biologics, just because it's super prevalent right now, as well as various computer vision applications, especially since these two areas I'm the most excited about. On the cold chain front, the launch of COVID-19 vaccines, this is marking a turning point in the fight against disease. But as you can imagine, the vaccination effort is challenging. How do we distribute doses where they're most needed and in the right quantities while preserving the vaccine integrity? The vaccine distribution in general requires complex logistics, coordination across public health and providers, and also requires safe transport and storage of the vaccines, all the way from the manufacturer to the administration sites. And one of the things that we've recognized is that this is perhaps the largest logistical effort since the Allied invasion of Normandy during World War II, as we're helping both from a vaccine demand prediction all the way to the vaccine supply integrity. And the reality is that there's no way that SAS or any other company for that matter can address a challenge like this alone. And that's why one of the trends that I'm seeing and something that I'm most excited about is that we're tackling this big complex problems with partners like Microsoft, leveraging their Azure cloud, as well as smaller engineering partners for their help with the telemetry, the engineering services, the physics-based modeling that they offer. So really interesting piece on the cold chain front. I know it's something that is intrinsically motivating for my colleagues, both at SAS and Microsoft and the engineering firm that we're working with. It's something that, data for good is one of the big tenets that either attracted me to SAS, that's kept people at SAS for decades, that's kept people, working nights, weekends, holidays to go and try and make a difference with the technology we have. So that's really cool. The other use case that I want to highlight was around computer vision. So in IoT, traditionally, initiatives that have seen a lot of traction have been in the asset performance management world. So for example, if you can keep a critical asset from breaking down by predicting when it needs maintenance, you can save quite a bit on costs. Where we are starting to see quite a bit of traction picking up in the last couple of years, and we're seeing kind of the future is happening around computer vision. And a couple examples. One has been for medical device manufacturer. And the problem was for them is there was a major inefficiency with the assembly process of the medical device. As a result, large batches of the devices were scrapped because defects were not consistently and accurately detected by existing systems and processes. So as part of the major digital transformation program, this organization needed a way to automate visual inspection processes and ensure product quality in a medical device manufacturer. And so just to give you an idea of the scope, they were producing about 100 million medical devices each year. The impact that we were able to achieve was pretty substantial. Within 2 weeks of running this, we were able to establish the infrastructure, the analytical tools, the models to enable the automatic identification and approved of the faulty devices, which resulted in over $2 million in material savings from the devices that were automatically inspected during the time frame. And it's been really cool to see how our customer has now started realizing incremental savings and revenue by applying the work that we did to the rest of their manufacturing processes. And just, Jamie, before I hand it back to you, there's a couple of really cool applications of computer vision that we're seeing around aerial inspection, where we're leveraging drone technology with a camera on top of it to do vegetation management based on species identification. It was Virginia creeper or something else to derive the anticipated growth rate to better schedule landscaping services around clearing vegetation around power lines, or even in construction settings to determine the process or progress and automate scheduling by having a 360-degree camera sitting on top of that, general dynamic spot the dog, that robot that can move around autonomously as it walks the path around the construction site to capture the images that drive the construction scheduling based on the progress that's being made. So some really cool applications that may have seemed futuristics are being deployed in real life environments. That's the part I'm probably most excited for.
It is exciting, and after we get to the panel, I want to dig in a little bit more about the what you brought up initially around tackling big problems through partnerships. And so, if that's a theme that comes up for the rest of you, I'd love to dig into that a little bit more. Tara, tell us more about what you're seeing at IDEO and the companies that you're working with and investing in. And then I'm going to ask Ricky the same question around the future of work.
Yeah, that was super interesting. Thanks for sharing, Bobby. Oh my gosh, so much. I am excited by too much and too many things. But I kind of wanted to dive into two areas, which I think are on the cusp of a revolution. Like things are changing and shaking up majorly in these two spaces. And I would say they are roughly bucketed into money and media. I think our financial stack as a society is being rewritten from inside out. Everything from the adoption of cryptocurrency and sort of new financial protocols built on top of different tokens to sort of new ways that new experiences and new UX experiences that are being built on top of finance APIs. Everything from the way we bank to the way we save, I think, is totally being redesigned. And this is so exciting for me because I think it's been stuck in a sort of a traditional structure for way too long. And I think that this is such a revolution that's sort of happening. And I know there's lots of talk about it. There's lots of froth in the media, talking about how finance is being disrupted, or this this is being pumped and this is being dumped. And I think there's so much going on. But I think if we dig beneath the surface, I think there's something that's really, really exciting where this is an opportunity. It's not a done deal, but this is an opportunity to redesign the financial structures that we have today. And I think that is such an exciting thing that's going on. And I'm seeing that all across, like I said, cryptocurrency, which we invest in, all the way to fintech and financial applications that are built, on more traditional rails. I think that's super cool. We're looking at like everything from borderless payments to universal currencies to, being able to sort of borrow or create loans for people who have across the world. And that's something that, is going to connect us more than ever before. And the second trend I wanted to dig into, apart from money, which I'm really excited by, is media. And I think the act of creation and consumption in media is totally different, right? We moved from, I don't know how old you guys are, and I don't want to talk about that, but, we grew up pretty much with the TV and the radio. It's broadcast media, and we sort of just moved into user-generated content. And I think what's emerging now in this next phase will be some sort of crowdsourced or crowd-owned studios, like media studios, right? Where the creation of content the feedback is so fast. Traditionally you would have the studio, they would create content, and then 6 months later or a year later it'll go get onto screens. And today it's pretty much in seconds. And that feedback loop between creation and consumption, I think, is going to generate a lot of interesting experiments that we can kind of enjoy, and maybe I'm so looking forward to what emerges out of that. And in the media space as well, apart from creation and consumption, I think where we're seeing a lot of heat right now is in the monetization, right? And I'm sure you've all heard the creator economy, and things like that. But what is happening is that these sort of user-generated content creators, who are making, content on social media platforms, to YouTube, to TikTok, I don't know, it's everywhere, to Substack, which is just an amazing publication, sort of platform for writers, is that there is sort of an economy that's being generated around them. So whether it's, being able to monetize from their content that they're making, the views that they're making, the ads that they're generating. And I think there's going to be another, and this is where the two worlds of money and media intersect. There's going to be a sort of a financial stack that also surrounds this creator economy. So like, for example, if you were a musician with, a 20-year digital music library, can you use that to generate loans, for example? I'm making it as up, but I think that's really interesting there. Can we change how copyright licensing or sort of music licensing is done today? If we look at if we look at how media rights are managed today, it's pretty antiquated. It's pretty much like different agencies passing around an Excel sheet and seeing if there's, sort of this piece was played here or there and how much was charged. And I think we're going to see a whole new sort of redesigning of those structures as well in the media space. And so excited. I was a journalist a long time ago, and we had ads in newspapers, and they were in print there, and and you would get it delivered every morning, and that was so different from the world we live in now. And I'm so excited to see more voices being heard, and more views being expressed in this new sort of media economy, and that gets me really excited.
And I love you pushing the boundaries on that. Thank you, Tara, for sharing those insightful areas of emerging and new growth. And I think one of the conversations I want to dig into are going back to some of the ethical issues around that Andrew had first mentioned as well, is because it's probably not all sunshine and rainbows per se. There's certainly huge amounts of upside, but design will play a critical role in the overall long-term consequences, both positive and negative, of those areas. So as products get designed to address them. Ricky, tell us more about what your work and specifically the future of work.
Yeah. Actually, a quick comment on the money side. I recently, like a couple of weeks ago, had a conversation with the CTO of a bank, and I asked him, like, what does the future of your bank look like in, let's say, 10, 15 years? And he said, I don't think my bank will exist, or at least just the way it is today. So totally evidence that validates your perspectives there, Tara. So on the future of work, I have a pretty simplistic or reductive way of thinking about it, which is to just center everything on the employee experience, which actually itself is a huge trend. Maybe not a fresh trend, but it's really one that's at the center of what's actually going to get traction in the work or in workplaces. And so, employee experience is kind of like that mirror image of just customer experience, or even like the war for talent. And for companies, it's just so critical. I think there was a 2017 study from MIT that showed like a significant 25% bump in profitability when you compare, the top quartile versus the bottom quartile on employee experience. So that's something that businesses have been slowly digesting and really pursuing. And, through that lens of employee experience, you can start to analyze technologies, which is, I guess, what, I should be doing at Dell. So, people throw out things like 5G, 8K, AI, VR, and those things are really, really interesting, but they actually already exist, right? They just haven't been integrated yet into the way we do work. Like, I don't think the panelists here actually use those things very much, or as much as we want to at work. And so my perspective on this and why I focus on employee experience over the technologies first is that there's no such thing as a technology change. There's only a social change. And it's really society's readiness for technology that drives it all. And this year is like a beautiful example for that. And so I don't have so many debates about that anymore. And so anyways, for example, when we think about 5G. By the way, 5G has been so ridiculously overhyped that I think we're all numb to it. And I think it's a good reminder to just remember it's not about faster internet, but it's actually lower latency, and having like dense connections, which will completely transform the way businesses, do business, but also bringing it back to the future of work is just how work gets done. And in many ways, if you look at the way we work, it's kind of dumb. Like we're just in front of a screen and we're pushing, a cursor around and we're typing things. There's a lot of opportunity to put all that hard work back into context and back into the real world. And for me, those technologies that I can reel off, it's really about that. And that really improves the employee experience. So you're going to improve, you're going to give people options on where they can work and also when they can work, but also you can put their work in a better context. You can give people mastery, autonomy, purpose, and you can also measure things and reward people properly. So it's really the lens there is employee experience.
Thank you, Ricky. And I love that. I love that you're, again, taking it back to the center of human-centered design, right? The person at the middle of this experience as we think about what work looks like. It's really who's experiencing that work and how do we best serve them. Andrew, tell us more about what you see as emerging trends that you're excited about and where you think the world's headed.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So I'll speak a little bit more to the like social, political, economic trends aspect of your question. So, and a little technology too, but there are really three trends that I'm really excited about. One is amongst the population generally, a greater awareness of the costs that consumer capitalism has incurred on our environment and on humans. So obviously we look around us, we see, all this appetite for having more stuff faster and cheaper. We see what it's done to the planet. We see, the human exploitation that's come from it, whether it's slave labor of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, China, or whether it's just mistreatment of employees here in the States. There's a greater awareness of this just in the general public, and people are starting to care. And related to that is the shift from a focus on solely stakeholder value to shareholder value more holistically for companies. The myth, effectively, the myth that the only responsibility of a public company is to care about shareholder value has been extremely damaging, because it's basically allowed companies to dodge accountability and to actually, with a straight face, make the argument that it would be unethical for them to care about the negative externalities of their products. So this is how you get a situation where a company like Amazon or Palantir or others can sell, an AI surveillance product that's racially biased and claim, it's not our responsibility to care about this. Effectively, we're looking at policymakers to rein us in. So we're seeing, I think, companies having less room to get away with that sort of dodging accountability for the externalities. And I think those social trends combined with technological trends that are, I guess, decentralizing in nature. So blockchain, cloud computing, these technologies that are disrupting legacy institutions of power and systems of power. I think all of that hopefully is going to mean that designers are able to embrace more inclusive design practices and able to better take into account the social externalities of the products and services that they're working to bring to market.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And I as a follow-on question, do you think part of the awareness around the social and human costs to the consumer capitalism that we experience and our growing willingness to think about not just shareholders but stakeholders comes, does that tie back into Tara's trend around our ability to get out and generate user-generated content and allowing everyone to have a voice? So you're expanding who's getting to bring these issues to the table and be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, citizen journalism, microblogging, like especially in parts of the world where authoritarian regimes really restrict the freedom of the press or freedom of expression in different ways. There are some technologies that have definitely been very liberating in that regard. So yeah, it's a good point.
Excellent. Well, I can't tell you how inspired I am because I knew that we would come up with some amazing trends and really be thinking about and pushing the boundaries of what the future may look like. But you all have really blown my mind and pushed my my paradigm as well of what the world may look like in the years to come. But let's tie this back to the conference topic and specifically this panel topic of how do you think of as designers, as individuals who are tasked with thinking about developing new products and services for consumers who are going to be existing in these paradigm shifts in the future? How do you think about deploying your design principles in that? Are there differences in how you do your work when you're thinking about a state that might not exist for another 5 to 10 years versus when you're trying to design a product for the next 1 to 2 years and meet a more immediate need of the consumer? Tell us more about the process that you use and how you think about your approach. Maybe we'll start with Tara on this one and then move to Andrew.
Thanks. What a great prompt. It's always such a conundrum, right? How do you design for users that do not exist? Or needs that may not currently be there or is on the cusp of arriving. There's one thing that we do. It's called design fiction, and it's such an interesting exercise. I totally recommend folks trying this out. And design fiction is the act of sort of storytelling. A future that you can imagine. You can take it in many different ways. It can be very dystopian. It can be extremely inspiring, but I think the act of actually sort of creating this fictional universe with pen and paper or a laptop kind of really brings it to life. And in a strange way, bringing this back to the work I do on a daily basis, I've always believed that startups are a way of prototyping the future that we want to live in, right? And as a startup founder, you have a vision or a sort of a sense of belief in this future state of the world, and that's what you're working towards. So the way I see it, startups are very much a prototype for the future, which is such an interesting way to think about it. If you think about the sort of the startup landscape that we're in, and the art of entrepreneurship, I think it's so tightly tied to design. And I think this is why I'm so passionate about what I do, because I believe that sort of the work of venturing or the work of sort of venture or startups is so closely tied to the art of creation. And so as a designer, I think that sort of creative energy that we bring into the space is so crucial for any startup endeavor. I think that's the reason why I am extremely excited about design-driven ventures, because I think that designers have that sort of creative mentality to imagine a future and then step into it.
I love that, and what I love about it is the fact that it's a recognition of the perpetual optimism of being an entrepreneur and believing in a future that doesn't currently exist today, and you're empowered to really bring that to life, right? And imagining a different state. So I thank you so much. I love that, Tara. Andrew, and then Ricky and Bobby. I'll allow both of you can chime in and provide comments as well.
Yeah, I'll build on what Tara was talking about and give some examples of that sort of design fiction or speculative design work in practice. So Tara's absolutely right. Designers are often the ones who have the privilege of being in a position where they're expected to imagine future states and to explore the implications of those states. And often it can be easier to help people understand the future if you give them a way to interact with it tangibly, even physically. So through prototyping and through creating these speculative design or design fiction experiences, you can really, it's kind of crazy. As a designer, you can actually almost empathize with people who live in the future, right? By bringing people into the future and then empathizing with them. So a cool anecdotal example I'll share quickly of that. And I wasn't involved in this, but I just think this is an awesome story, so I love sharing it. There was a major energy company who was trying to think about the future of energy scarcity, and specifically, once we're all driving electric vehicles, what if we're in a situation where there's energy scarcity around electricity, and we basically have to figure out how do we ration who gets power in their car. So they commissioned the speculative design agency to actually to come in and help them explore this issue. And what that company did is they actually fabricated like a physical device that would be the future like gas pump or electrical charging station, and fabricated little ID cards. And basically the hypothesis was, what if we ration energy based on someone's like job, basically? So if you're a doctor, you get, a full energy ration for your car. If you're a fast food worker, maybe not so much. So they fabricated these actual ID cards like with these different job roles, and then met with the executive team of this company, took them on a field trip down to the parking lot, and passed out these cards at random, and walked these executives through an experience where they each had to go up to the pump and put in their card and be told, either you get power today or you don't get power today. And it helped that team not only think about the future, right, but actually experience the future and feel how that felt like. And that helped them make decisions about the strategic direction and how they're thinking about energy scarcity in the future. So that's an example of how powerful speculative design can be, especially when you make it as tangible as actual physical artifacts that you're interacting with. That's a power that designers are really empowered to do often, which is great.
And what I love about that specific example is the fact that it wasn't just focused on the designers. You brought the company, the decision makers that are going to be making the investments, into that lived experience that probably built empathy in a way that you otherwise would not have been able to do. So thank you for sharing that, Andrew. Ricky or Bobby, either one of you want to jump in?
Just a quick comment from me. I mentioned that I spent the bulk of my career as a management consultant. So I love frameworks and methodologies. And the one framework that I wanted to share with the audience that's helped me tie the high-level strategy all the way down to the execution is the strategic choice cascade. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a series of 5 questions that are all intertwined and reinforce one another. The first question is, what's our ambition? This is the mission, the vision of the organization that we use as a beacon for the entire organization to rally around. Then once you've identified that, you go and look at the next questions. Where do we play? What are the verticals, the industries, and the use cases that we want to target? Once you've identified that, then you look at, okay, how do we win? Are we going product first, or are we combining our products to go to market with a subset of end-to-end offerings and outcomes? And then the next question, kind of the second to last questions, what are the capabilities needed? What's the level of IP that's needed? What are the demos needed? Marketing videos, creative marketing, press releases in order to allow us to be successful. And then ultimately the final question is around what are the systems needed, meaning what's going to be the operating model, the engagement model to allow us to deploy resources to the problems, to the markets that we've selected. And this is just a quick framework that's allowed me and I think organizations to just be able to tie this high-level strategic direction, break it down into more tangible kind of near-term strategy, and then start tying that into the actionable steps that we need to start executing on a day-to-day basis to drive towards that strategy.
Thank you for sharing that. That translational piece is so critical to organizations and being able to successfully execute about, with the big visions that can come out of these exercises. Ricky, do you have anything that you'd like to jump in and add on these as we talk about, approaches or systems or processes that we use when thinking about the future?
No, I completely agree with what was shared so far. And so for the speculative or the design fiction, the speculative design, that's extremely important because businesses are so good at optimizing, and they will optimize their way out of having a competitive space. So having those brand new perspectives is absolutely critical. And to Bobby's point, actually delivering that is even harder. And so you really need to systematically think through things. I feel like my only contribution is at those junctures, you have so many decisions that you have to make. And that's where you really need to bring in the voice of the customer. And I think, we talked about empathy, having that empathy lead and guide the decisions is really, really important. And I loved the example as well around getting the leaders to empathize, because sometimes that is the hardest part, because they're just so busy and they have no time to, get a sense of what the user or the customer is really experiencing.
Thanks so much. And I think this is, I think highlighting some case studies are always a great way to bring this out. And so are there others, and thank you for sharing the specific one that you shared, Andrew, with the oil company around electric vehicles. Are there other examples of where you've seen good design deployed to really start to address or identify those future consumer needs? Any other case studies we should bring forward? Because I think this is a great way to learn. It's a hard question. Okay. I'm going to give you some more time to think about that and ask. One of the questions that we have coming in from the audience is around, are there specific qualitative or quantitative research gathering methods that are different from what you normally do? Or are these tools that you tend to, when you think about designing for the future needs, are these tools pretty similar? Is there anything different about what you do when it comes to the tools? And no is a completely fine answer. It'd be good to know that actually the tool set remains the same. It's just a framing. I'm going to cold call you like I do in an MBA class. Tara, I'm going to ask you, what do you think? Are there differences, or is it pretty similar?
I think that's such a good question. Actually, that's a great question. I kind of was thinking about it, and I think what is interesting is that when you're designing for the future, or when I'm looking at, startups that are designing products that are, truly on the edge, what becomes interesting is that, when you take sort of benchmark metrics from existing products, it becomes almost irrelevant. And so I think what is interesting in the act of designing for the future is that, at the same time, you are actually having to define the metrics or the objectives that make sense for the product or the future that you're trying to build for as well. So I think I would say it's actually pretty different in the sense where you might borrow from existing benchmarks or metrics or objectives, or whatever. You could measure something like number of accounts you created or so on and so forth. But the objectives are often different. So I think that's such a great question, and I never really had a chance to think about it. But yeah, I would say the goalpost is different if you're building for the future, because the future is totally different from what exists today.
So what I'm hearing you say then is perhaps the measures of the goalposts are different, but the processes or tools that you use to explore remain primarily unchanged.
Absolutely, yeah.
Others agree or disagree with that approach?
Yeah, I agree. I think the tweak that you really make is like, who are you going to talk to, or what is the data that you're going to try to go after? But the methods don't really change. Even if you're not trying to understand the future and you're doing like a typical user research, you actually learn a lot about future wants and needs anyways. So it's not like you can't get the future either.
And Ricky, just to pile on to that, I think I've seen a lot of organizations and groups make mistakes is when they were designing solutions and products, they were designing things for the near term, meaning that focusing on the proof of concept or the pilot that was at hand. How do we deliver, this small piece of functionality in a way that's cost effective? However, that has often led to decisions that will later incur technical debt. So for example, combining a lot of open source technology to be able to conduct a pilot and then trying to scale that in a more robust environment would often lead to having to redesign, go back to make decisions that would scale a little bit better. And I think this is kind of where organizations would probably have saved themselves a lot of headaches by designing kind of with the scale, with the enterprise focus in mind.
That's terrific. Great insight. Thank you, Bobby. So there's another question coming that I really love, because it's a question I think we all struggle with, especially entrepreneurs, right? And I deal with entrepreneurs every day and thinking about, what are you competing against? And sometimes they say nothing, but you're at least competing against the status quo, right? So you're always competing against something, even if it's just what we do today. And so when designing for the future, how much do you disrupt the old ways of human behavior, right? Instead of leveraging them? How do you think about this balance? Because we know one of the hardest things to change is our behavior.
So one thought that comes to mind, Jamie, and it is a good question. I mean, the work of design is always focused on solving a problem or a challenge, right? We call it human-centered design, and that's because you start with who's the human that you're designing for, what challenge are they experiencing, and then in the context of that challenge, how can we design a solution for that human that meets their needs and helps them solve that challenge. So this question, I feel like I'll give the good MBA answer, right? It depends. It's context specific, like so much of design, but I'd say when designing for the future, to speak a bit to the last question too, in some ways it's similar to designing for the present in that you do start with that moment of empathy with the human. And I think in some situations you'll then find the solution that they need does leverage a lot of their existing, behaviors or norms, whether that's for a person or a system or what have you. In some cases, it might mean strategically disrupting, certain aspects of that. But again, it all starts with like, who's the human and what challenge are they experiencing? And then how do you build the solution around that context?
That's great, thank you. Other comments? All right.
I can maybe chime in. I think all entrepreneurs definitely have a rebellious side, right? And I think, there's sort of a motto I have, which is question everything, question all assumptions you have. And, you might end up in a little bit of a circular loop where you're like, oh, I'm questioning myself, questioning everything. So, obviously you don't want to be trapped too much. But I would say that there's just so much latent, like just assumptions we hold about the world. Everything from what products can be built or what businesses can be built, down to UX and interaction. I mean, Bumble is a great example of that, right? That just went public. Such an amazing story. But the simple act of a dating app that puts power in the hands of the woman is just a simple tweak. It's a simple tweak on an old assumption, and I think that just disrupted, and opened up a whole new sort of behavior. An opportunity area. So I think that's really interesting. So I would say definitely have that mindset, but obviously, can always lean on the tried and tested if it works for you.
I love that. And I love an example of orthodoxy breaking, right? How do you challenge existing orthodoxies that we have? Andrew.
Oh, just a quick example, which is also another example of speculative design. Tara, I spent a brief period at IDEO Collab as well in the Cambridge office. And one of the projects that was going on while we were there is, to speak to your point earlier, Tara, if we're moving to a future where money is digital, if cryptocurrency is the future, where does that leave kids? Because today, like, kids learn money management skills in these really low risk contexts, and it's pretty easy because it's physical money, but you don't want to disrupt a child's ability to become financially literate because we have all these new technologies. So the team that was exploring this just straight up built a lemonade stand, like they had time to do this, I guess, built a lemonade stand in the office alongside their sort of speculative fiction or a speculative design app, like an actual app that basically applied the concept of a piggy bank to cryptocurrency. And what they were doing here, and this gets to the current question, they were leveraging kind of the existing mental model that a child has for financial management, which is basically saving for stuff they want to buy, right? That's what kids do. They like put money in a piggy bank to buy a Lego, and when they have enough money, they buy the Lego. So they were basically taking that existing mental model or pattern of behavior that would already be familiar to children and applying it to a new context, cryptocurrency, and basically designing an experience around that new technology that felt familiar with those existing mental models. So that's an example of maybe bringing the two together and helping people make that bridge.
That's a fantastic example. And I think it's a great jumping off point into another question that I want us to dig into. And specifically thinking about ethics in design and power structures in the design process, right? Designers being in a role that has actually quite a lot of power, and thinking about how you integrate other voices. And with this shifting future, we've brought up several examples where if we are not thoughtful as designers, as innovators, then we will end up in a world that continues to perpetuate exclusivity and perhaps even the socioeconomic gap that's so prevalent in our country today. And I love this conversation about the shifting of control and power in finance and in media, and obviously those two are linked. But I want to hear more about your thinking as designers, as people who are building products today, how you think about accessibility and utility to perhaps user groups that may have previously or historically been excluded, inclusion in the process of design, and then also that access to final products and services. Our world is changing very rapidly, and I think there's a lot that we can do and contribute toward moving toward equity, more equitable environment and more inclusive environment, but it's going to be hard. And so I want to hear how you frame this, how you think about this within your organizations, and then what should designers be doing? Bobby, I'm going to start with you and then go to Ricky.
Sounds good, Jamie. I love the cold calling. Brings me back to my time with Fuqua. The couple of tenets from SaaS that really appealed to me was around analytics for all and analytics all in one place. And that comes down to the business need of helping operationalize AI. And what I mean by that is that you don't have to be a data scientist or a developer. If we can provide a user experience that's low code or drag and drop environment, we're able to put the tools in the hands of the business users versus having to rely on a technical resource or a data scientist to use the tools that we provide. What that does for the organization, for the user, is that there's no longer this buffer between what the business problems that are occurring and the tools in order to derive some sort of insight. So I think that's one big aspect of it. And another piece is to say, well, if we're going to have all analytics in one place, there needs to be an inclusion from a technology standpoint. We need to be able to incorporate the various open source tools, Python, R, Luna, and be able to wrap it around with a sort of model management and deployment capabilities to ensure that the users have the tools and solutions throughout the entire life cycle of the work that they're doing.
Thanks for bringing those points forward, Bobby. All great points on the inclusion piece. Ricky.
Yeah, well, at the workplace, actually, inclusivity is a super topical, relevant thing right now. It's actually, my perspective is that it's at risk even more now than ever because of digitization, because of automation. It's the access to digital tools, and also the way automation is being developed might not include many communities. It might not include even like small or medium businesses. You could even end up pushing them out of the marketplace. So it's also super topical because if we just think about, thinking about how people do work, the impacts of the lockdown has been that we started to be more inclusive with remote workers, for example. And there's many other kind of workers that get included these days. And going back to Andrew's example, this has been like an amazing empathy hack for for many organizations' leadership, where they're like, oh, I now have a different experience of doing work. I can empathize more with, the employees that I manage. And so organizations are like rethinking how they can develop work systems. But again, it's at risk because they might not actually end up designing, work at their company in a way that includes the people that need the most help because they have more empathy now, but it might be slightly in the wrong direction. And so anyways, like it's a super hard question for me to think about, but there's a lot of turbulence there.
Andrew, please, you think about the ethics question all the time. And so I want to hear from you specifically. And I also want to talk about where organizations are falling down on this.
So one thing that comes to mind with inclusive design, it's important to think about the systems and incentives that exist that are barriers to inclusive design. So just to give one example, within our existing venture capital system, one of the kind of core tenets is, and then the pressure exerted on startups is scale as quickly as possible, right? Oftentimes, rapid scaling is not necessarily, but it's often antithetical to thoughtful, inclusive design, right? It's not necessarily feasible to scale as quickly as possible to meet these metrics and objectives, to keep getting funding, and to also explore in a thoughtful way, the potential ramifications of what you're building on marginalized communities. So it's important to think about like what incentive systems exist for startups, what force do those incentives exert upon their ability to be inclusive and thoughtful in their design. And I think when you just look around and see some of the most highly valued, most valuable companies in the world are also the same companies that have done the most harm with their technology products. It's not necessarily a coincidence. So think about what pieces of that system might be broken and exerting negative pressure on the ability of companies to practice inclusive design.
This is such a great conversation. It just reminds me that opportunity is such a double-edged sword, right? Like it's an opportunity to redesign a system, but we often also fall into old habits and traditional structures.
And just to pile on, guys, this is something that is fresh in my mind because I popped onto this YouTube video yesterday. It was with regard to where organizations are failing. And this was Elon Musk talking about how the large reason a lot of companies are failing is that there's too many MBAs in leadership. And then obviously I was triggered by that. So I was like, well, what does he know? He doesn't know how to run a company as well as I do. But I listened to the video and his main point was that there's too much focus on financials, on corporate presentations, on meetings, and not enough focus on making the product, the offering, the solution as great as it could possibly be. And he was saying that a lot of leaders would benefit more from walking down on the production floor, getting a better idea of how their product is being made, looking and talking to users and seeing how they experience the products and solutions that we create over that of creating the kind of the financial models, the corporate presentations, et cetera, which I thought was, okay, that's pretty insightful. Maybe he does know what he's talking about.
I think your reaction is probably to the notion that MBAs can't and won't do that, right? And I think the generation of today's MBAs, and particularly those that we're producing at Fuqua, are more than willing to do that. And in fact, design is a huge component of our curriculum, and that deep empathy work that we do, and the recognition that it's not necessarily all about the spreadsheet, right? Which is the point that I think that he was probably making, and is a very valid point. So we agree that this is a huge challenge, and thinking about ethics in designing ethics, or considering ethics in design of future products and services that are going to touch the lives of consumers around the world is so important. And I loved what you said, Tara, around opportunity is a double-edged sword, right? And that's certainly very true. And Andrew, I think your point about the fact that there are structures and systems, or even orthodoxies of how we think about startup growth and investment that perhaps push us in a direction to do something that's not necessarily always the best for something other than the financial top line. And we won't even say bottom line, right? Because we know that those are not necessarily the same, particularly in the current investment environment. And so I want to hear from you ideas. What can innovators, entrepreneurs, large companies who are thinking about and wanting and really have a desire to be more equitable in terms of how they think about their future growth and product design, what can they be doing? Is it as simple as pausing and thinking about it? Or is there something a greater that you would recommend in terms of an exercise or an approach that you think they need to be taking in order to ensure that, as we move forward, we don't replicate the past? I'm starting with Ricky.
Yeah, I didn't want to keep repeating a topic, but I think it it does boil back down to empathy and getting the organization, the broader organization, to empathize with very different people. And it's just such an easy trap to fall into, where you assume the user, maybe you did before, or maybe worse than that, you assume that the user is you, and that therefore you can just optimize for yourself. And another trap is that you design for the buyer rather than the user, and all these things again will cause people or organizations to optimize for absolutely the wrong thing and end up including or not including the right people. So thinking through how we can scale empathy, it comes down to super basic things like storytelling and photographs of real moments, or even videos, getting people to get out of their own heads. I guess one thing that we're exploring at Dell is using VR, which is an interesting vehicle for, I guess it's like an empathy hack. It really gets you into a different perspective. So we are thinking very hard on, like, how do we scale empathy within our organization? And it's not something that we've figured out yet.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Just a quick story from where we sat down with the users. This was for a manufacturing client. We're working on an asset performance management type of use case. We got their input, built beautiful dashboards that are very pertinent to them. But the one piece where we missed on was thinking about how are they gonna interact with it in their daily day-to-day jobs. So we gave them tablets, or specifically iPads, for them to carry around as they're doing maintenance on the production lines. As you can imagine, within 1 week, 7 out of the 10 tablets were broken because they've got tools they're throwing into their basket. So this is one of the things which was a pretty glaring omission, is that, hey, we need to have some ruggedized tablets that we're putting in the hands of the maintenance staff, because that's otherwise it's not congruent to the work they're doing. So again, it's a reason to run these pilots, to run these experiments, but it's also one of those things where you really kind of have to walk the line, talk to the product owners, talk to the users as much as possible to avoid these types of issues.
I think I saw you getting ready to come off mute and perhaps share something as well, as we think about, how can we be intentional with our inclusivity designing for the future?
Yeah, just to add on to what Bobby and Rick here were saying, I think innovation is such a vulnerable act, right? You're embarking on an adventure, on a journey to somewhere unknown, right? We don't know if it's going to fail or it succeeds, and the statistics are against you in such a vulnerable space. And I think because of that, innovators sometimes fall into this trap of confirmation bias, right? Which is, you look for information that supports rather than, maybe challenges or questions your assumptions. So I would say that diversity of thought is such a superpower in venture creation. And this is something I've seen over and over again. Whether it's, looking at the range of types of archetypes of consumer that could be in market for your product, to having just sort of feedback from a much wider, diverse set of people versus what you assumed was your original user, can just give so much more and widen your market opportunity much more. I would say, I think that's the one thing that that's the one takeaway I have after talking to many different startups and looking at several different founders. And I think that we often kind of just fall into, it's almost like, and I totally get it. It's a very vulnerable space. It's like, I want to feel confident in what I'm doing, and this is the way to go. But I think, sort of allowing yourself, and I think design creates this space to do that. And I think this is the superpower of design. Design, sort of creates this space for innovator or the entrepreneur to sort of open up and be a little bit more flexible and be a little bit more vulnerable by talking to their users or talking to a wider set of users through prototypes and lightweight prototypes that can be thrown away or discarded, and they kind of create this space that doesn't feel like you are in defense. And I think that is part of the superpower of design and venture.
Indeed. And I want to build on this because one of the approaches that we take here at Fuqua with our entrepreneurs is actually to take a moment and pause and reflect on, what are the potential negative social outcomes or environmental outcomes of the venture or the business model that I'm considering, right? Who are the stakeholders that might be involved? Am I cutting out a middle person, right, whose livelihood depends on this? Are there potential environmental costs? Am I disrupting an economy, perhaps, particularly when you're thinking about serving, international markets? And so really taking a pause to reflect, I think, and also just ask yourself that question, because we all know that the most successful entrepreneurs are not those who are launching because they want to have, make a lot of money, but they're launching because they want to have an impact in some way, and they're driven by that impact. So they're eternally optimistic. And I think just the behavior and the exercise and the discipline to take the pause and ask yourself, are there potential negative outcomes, can be very powerful. It doesn't address the problem of the systems and structures that you're internally operating in terms of gaining external financing and being forced to grow quickly. But I think it's a reflective exercise that we all should probably take on a little bit more. And so I'm turning to the chat. I know I've got quite a few questions coming in, and one specifically I want to make sure that we get to. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit on what's here. Someone was asking for someone who's specifically spent a majority of their career outside of design, what steps and processes did you find helpful in starting a career in that question? But I want to back that up. I want to make that a little bit broader. And I want to say, what are the skills? What are the competencies and capabilities that someone who wants to put themselves in a role like the ones that you're filling inside an organization, or perhaps as an entrepreneur or independent innovator, what tech capabilities should early career professionals be building in order to be successful? We'll start with Bobby.
Sure, and I'll be totally honest. The current role I'm in, it's not a design function. However, it has a lot of the design capabilities that are needed that I used to be able to be successful. I think it's having the empathy to focus on the user and the outcomes. One of the big changes that SaaS as an organization is going through is evolving from being a product company to being a use case driven outcome as a service type of organization. That's a big change that impacts the way we do contracting, the way we do financial billing, the way that we market our solutions, and the way that we partner. So that has a very big impact on how we're driving this. And what I mean by moving from a products company toward the solutions company, multiple offerings company, is we take our products, we bundle them up, we bring our partners to layer in additional products and services to turn those into solutions. And then we wrap that around with a go-to-market and sales kind of bubble to turn those solutions into offerings.
Perfect. Others of you, what capabilities and expertise should people be cultivating, or what steps should they be taking earlier in their careers?
So being familiar with and literate in just the language and methodologies of design is really important. I think there are really great opportunities to engage with that at Fuqua through the Design and Innovation Club, and they have a lot of resources they could point you to. But another point, fortunately, like most of the just actual software tools that designers use, probably not coincidentally, are really well designed. And one of the ways in which they're really well designed is they're pretty easy to teach yourself to use. So tools like Figma or Sketch, prototype, like these sort of and those, I guess, are geared more toward like software products, right? But a lot of these tools that designers use to prototype and to iterate and to actually produce their designs, I just taught myself to use by playing around in, and they're very intuitive. So that's a huge, I mean, I think like a lot of positions within the tech industry, if you can just become literate in those tools and just start building imaginary apps and start building imaginary prototypes, think of a problem or a challenge statement and try to solve it with design. You can build up your chops and even build up a portfolio without even having like a design job. And then you can leverage that to move your career more in the direction of design.
Yeah, building on what Andrew was saying, I think for me, design is very much, having a maker mindset. And your tools, at least the way we see it at IDEO, can be anything from, like Figma, these software tools that you can use to create designs, to, business models, to strategy. These are all just sort of tools that you can build with. But I think, sort of building that muscle around making, so prototyping, so moving from thought to action is such a muscle that I would encourage anyone to pursue. And you can do that in a multitude of different ways, both from prototyping a startup or venture, or even fleshing out a business model and seeing, what would that look like as a website, right? And turning that into a sort of a visceral, tangible prototype. And I think that maker mindset is very much at the cornerstone of design, at least for me. I want to recommend a book by IDEO's former CEO, Tim Brown, called Creative Confidence. And I think that's such a great book for sort of building up anyone's sort of creative confidence, and such a good a book around that, which is, just building the habits and behavior around, being creative and being a maker. I think anyone can be a designer. It's a mindset versus, being super proficient at Photoshop, for example. That's a skill. It's a great skill to have. But I think putting yourself firmly in that mindset and frame of mind is a great first step.
Wonderful. Ricky, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess design in corporate cultures is actually still a very evolving and new thing. So don't feel like there's a fixed path to getting into it. Like everyone who's in the field came in from all kinds of ways. So don't be intimidated at all. I also want to throw in a book recommendation, which is Creative Clarity. It's by John Coco. And for me, that's a really nice entryway into making it actionable and thinking through, what are the ways you can approach a project so that you can bring in a design mindset.
Thank you so much. I think this is a great ending point for our panel today. And I want to start by thanking all of you. I'm inspired. I've learned an absolute ton. And I can imagine that all the amazing people that have joined us today for this discussion have learned as well. And so I want to summarize some of our key thoughts. I think some takeaways, the world is changing, and the world is changing rapidly, and we're going to see a shift in power structures, perhaps, and certainly the ability to create wealth in areas like media and money. Internet of Things is changing, how companies think about how they engage with their users and what opportunities are emerging from that. And the future of work is going to impact us all, right? We are all individuals, we all work. And so what does that look like, and how does the world around us change how we actually work with each other and within our organizations? And as we think about this designing for this future that's emerging, right? How do we think about doing that and really constructing this design fiction and giving we heard from Andrew specifically, of giving our users and clients tangible ways of interacting with this future state that we're envisioning, to drop them in that future and then learn from them and how they might interact. And what I've heard from all of you today is just, in order to do this well, it requires empathy, but it also requires a willingness to be bold and challenge orthodoxies, right? If we continue to do exactly what we've been doing, we're going to end up where we are. So it really requires you to challenge what the existing norms and status quo really is. And equally as importantly, as you go about this work, really thinking about the power in the design process, the power balance in the design process, and equity and inclusion in what you're designing and how you're designing it. And so really thinking about, I heard from Ricky today, how can you scale empathy, which I love thinking about that in a meaningful way, and really including that diversity of thought. We heard from Tara, how do you include that diversity of thought in the design process to ensure your many voices are being heard and you're challenging your own existing biases, confirmation biases. And so I hope all of you will get out there and start to actually exercise your muscle of moving from thought to action. Thank you, Tara. That's gonna be a quote of mine moving forward. So I hope all of you learned something today that you can move forward, and I encourage you to get out there and practice that muscle. So thank you, design panelists. I can't say how grateful we are, and on behalf of the entire team of the Design Innovation Club, thank you for your time today and your amazing insights.